So, because we've wasted enough time, let's just get into the show because Nora is at preschool right now. I have had a really weird morning, which I might tell you guys about sort of as the show goes on. And I will just sort of get into what we've got for today's show because it's a packed show. So, let's get started. Welcome to Wool and Spinning. This is episode 80. My name is Rachel. I can be found pretty much everywhere as Well for Pearls. As you can tell, this is our live stream for the month. It is a week late because last week was insane. We were all sick. James was in his second week of kindergarten. It was just nuts. So I said, enough. I have to take something off of my plate and I need to move something. And this was it. It got moved a week so that I'd be much more relaxed and much more, just able to take the time and able to podcast and stream with you and have a chat and not feel like everything else was going to hell in a handbasket, excuse my language. So today's show is quite packed. I had a question in the Ask Anything thread on Ravelry in the Ravelry group about how I build my control cards. So those are my spinners control cards. So this is what those look like. And we will be talking about deconstructing those today and looking at how I build those, because that was, I thought, a great question. That came from Casey. Then I have 3 finished spins. This is what happens when I don't podcast for a while. I have a lot of finished stuff. I have 3 finished spins, and I have 1 in progress that I actually don't have with me because it's on my wheel, but I'll mention it quickly. And I have another deconstruction that I thought I would talk about really briefly today. And I actually have a non-handspun, non-spinning project to talk to you about because it's part of our Stashdown that's going on in the Ravelry group. So, okay, so Jessica, you just made me laugh out loud in my head because I can't laugh out loud on the show. Jess says, oh, come on, you're a mom. You don't have all the time in the day. By the way, I need a drink now, please. Me too. It's been crazy. So everybody says that when your kids go to school, life gets busier. And I didn't not believe everybody. I totally believed everyone. It's why I cleaned off my slate this fall and I didn't take on stuff. I didn't take on Spinzilla. There's a few other things I decided not to take on. And it was because everybody said it's going to get busier when the kids go to school. So I totally believed everyone. But it's gone insane. What is good? James isn't even here. And it's just busy, busy, busy. And I think it's the driving because the school that the kids go to is 20 minutes away. So I'm in the car now for at least an hour every day. That's really changed things because we never drove anywhere when I was at home with the kids because we could walk to the preschool. So that's been the biggest change and something definitely to get used to. All right, so let's talk about control cards, spinning control cards. I thought this was a great question because, oh my gosh, just dropped a bunch of stuff on the floor. Because control cards are something that a lot of more experienced spinners talk about. And you guys, I've shown this to you before. This is my spinner's control box. These are all my sample cards, and this is what it looks like inside. These actually aren't all of my cards. I cleaned a bunch of them out and I put them into binders that I knew into like slots in binders that I knew I wouldn't be looking at for a long time. They were stuff that was like a one-off project. I'll show you an example of stuff that I just felt like I didn't need to have right at my fingertips. So this is an example of a BFL silk that I spun, and this is just the plied yarn. This was the yarn, for those of you who've been with me for a long time, this is the yarn that I spun for James's mitts that I made for him last winter. So I don't really need any of the information that's on here. I more just wanted a record of the yarn itself. So some of these control cards I've been taking out and I've been putting in my binder because I don't need them and I don't need to be able to reference them. Whereas the cards that I find really useful and really helpful are cards like my American Tunis, for example. I used this card a lot when I was combing and doing my American Tunis because I had washed it and I wanted to know what I was spinning it at. So I kept this with me on my wheel. 4 drafts with 2 treadles onto the wheel. So I drafted 4 times, I treadled twice, and then I funneled it onto the wheel. So like that's information that you really need to know when you're spinning. And so I keep stuff like that close by. And these become more of like a journal of the yarns that I've made and the things that I've made, more so than projects that I necessarily want to recreate. So this was my card that I used for something. I'm going to cover up the picture that's coming up in the project that Katrina and I are working on. And there's going to be a bunch of spoilers in October for that her and I have been working on to share that with you guys. So the way that I build my control cards is basically, I'll just take one out of here to give you an example. And I'll use that as my example so that I can show you. These are good ones. These are some of my raw fibers that I've spun recently. So they're really good ones to show you because it includes what I did for the washing. So this is my process. I have fiber. I want to spin it. I don't know what to do with it. It's somehow been processed in some way, and I want to try to figure out how I'm going to sample it. And I figure out a couple of ways that I think I might want to sample it so that I can figure out how I'm going to spin it, and then I make my control card when I decide on which sample I like the best. So for this one, for example, this was the yarn that I made for my fireside pullover, the one by Jane Richmond that I made last year. So these are samples of the yarn that I spun. These are samples of the singles, and then this is samples of the unwashed plied yarn, and this is washed plied yarn. And what I wrote, how I start basically is I look at the fiber and I figure out what the characteristics of the fiber is that I want to highlight. So maybe the fiber is really super long stapled. And I know that based on a long staple length and it's really smooth and it's comb top, let's say, that I'm going to want to spin it in a worsted or a semi-worsted way. So I know I'm going to want to have some variation of a short forward or a short backward draw. Then I'll sample that, letting air in and smoothing the air out. And those will usually be my 2 samples for worsted style yarns. For woolen yarns, I tend to sample a short backward draw with letting the air in, and then I'll also sample a long draw, and then I'll choose between those 2 samples. That's kind of how very simple way of how I sample, unless I'm going to spin like over the fold or something. And then when I figure out which of the finished samples I want to make, so I'll have my finished samples. So I'll have a few of these. And I'll have them all, I'll usually have 2 minimum of these little, usually 5 gram samples, sometimes 9 grams. And I'll pick which one, I'll wash them. And I'll wash them the way that I would wash the finished yarn. And then I'll deconstruct them and say, okay, which one do I like better? Why do I like it better? What do I like about it? Blah, blah, blah. And once I figure out which sample I like the best, then I go back and I try to recreate that yarn. And that's when I start making notes on my cards. And I'll say which wheel I spun it on, what ratio I spun it on, how many times was I treadling, what was the length of my draft. I'll write, was I drafting once per treadle, or was I drafting out to a certain length and treadling about 4 times, but drafting like 6 times. I'll write all of that down. Whether my uptake was really high, whether my uptake was low, was I in double drive, was I in Irish tension? Because if you spin on an Irish tension wheel or a wheel that can do multiple setups like the Matchless, it can do Irish, Scotch, and double drive. I will make a note of whether I was in double drive or not, or Scotch tension or Irish tension. I make a note of which flyer I used, because some of my flyers on some of my wheels, my Magercraft is a good example. The ratio at the bottom end, so at the top end of my regular whirl is 14.3, but on my lace whirl, the bottom ratio, the starting ratio is like 15. So they're very, very close. So I'll make a comment about which tool I used. And then I'll do a sample of the singles, and I'll take some of those singles and I'll wrap them around. And this is what the back of it looks like. It's not pretty, but this is the back. And then I will write, and then I'll do just a little Andean ply just around my wrist. I'll do a bracelet ply, and then I'll put those unwashed, unfinished singles beneath my finished singles. So I'll have them underneath and they'll be unwashed. And that gives me my sample. Now, something that I just started doing recently was a ply back sample. And the reason for doing that, so it looks like this, and I tie them onto my card. And the reason for that is because sometimes when you do a ply back sample, so you pull your singles off your wheel and you ply it back on itself and it makes a little pigtail, those are often different than what you want your actual finished yarn to look like. So I will often have a sample of my fresh spun plied yarn, a ply back sample, and my finished yarn. And the reason for that is because when you're spinning along and you want to check to see if your singles are on par or on target and they're what you're trying to create, if you ply back your singles and place them next to your ply back test, you can see if you're sort of about right. Whereas if you just look at the singles, you might have the right width, but you might not have the right amount of twist. So I will often have both now in my new cards. I'll have my ply back test, my actual plied yarn. So my new sample cards look like this with one more hole for the ply back test. So they're pretty busy, and they're pretty they're busy, and they also have a lot of information on them. And sometimes I don't make the whole, like sometimes I don't write down all of the information right away. Like sometimes I'll write down, so this is a good example. This was some Cheviot that I spun for Mike for socks. And the only information that I have on there is where it was from, that I dyed it at home. See if I can get this to focus a bit better. And that I spun it on the Matchless at 11:1, and it ended up being a 2-ply worsted, and that it was going to be socks for Mike. That's it. That's all I wrote. And I will do that sometimes because sometimes that's all the information that I need. Now, I still have a sample of that yarn, and in an ideal world, and when I have time, I will take some of that finished yarn and I'll attach it to that card so that I have basically like a journal entry of that yarn and a catalog of that yarn. Whether I actually do it or not, I have no idea. We shall see. So when you're using a spindle, I didn't show you any of my control cards for my spindles, but I always write down which spindle I'm using. And because some of my spindles are the same, I'll sometimes write down, like for my Turtle Maids, I'll write down how heavy the spindle was. So I will weigh it before I start spinning so that I have a record, because some of my Turtle Maids are 30 grams when you put them together and some of them are 35 grams. It just depends on which pieces I grab. So I will make a note of that. Let's see, I'm just looking to see if you guys have any questions about that, because usually people have lots and lots to, you guys are just a wealth of information, and it's wonderful to be able to include that in the show. That's why I like the live streaming so much. Yeah, I don't think there's anything more to say about that. So without further ado, let's get into the rest of the show. So I had teasered this on Instagram, and I'm really hoping this doesn't screw up the live stream, but I'm going to hook up the other camera now. So I'm going to grab the battery and I'm going to hook it up, and we're all going to say a prayer, and we're going to hope that this whole thing doesn't blow up, and hope that I don't lose you guys. But I really need the other camera so that I can give you guys a really up close view of what the yarns look like that we're talking about today. And also, while I'm doing this, yeah, fingers crossed, Kelly, fingers crossed. The other thing that I wanted to mention while I'm doing this, and hopefully before I lose you guys, is for those who won spindles during Tour de Fleece, there were the Rundle spindles. I'm not sure I actually ever showed these to you guys on the show, but they're so pretty. So 4 of you guys won these spindles, and if you don't know if you won or not, please head over to the blog, wellforpearls.com, and have a listen to the Tour de Fleece recap. That was published as a public extra woolen spinning radio episode. It was for everyone to listen to. It's not very long. These were made... there's all different weights. They're really pretty. I finally found mailing bags for these. So I couldn't find anything that was big enough that would protect the rim of these. These are great spindles for beginners in particular, and I tried them for plying, and they were great for plying. They spun for a long time. So, and they have a nice long shaft, so you can run them down your leg. So if you would like one and you're hoping that you maybe won one, I've only heard from 3 people. There's a 4th person that I'm waiting to hear from. But for those who sent me their addresses, their mailing addresses, these will go in the mail this week for you. And I hope that you enjoy those, because I had emailed you guys back and said I'll send them in the mail next week because I haven't found the right envelopes, but then I couldn't find any. I had to go to like 4 stores to find envelopes that were just right. So now that I have them, I will pop those in the mail this week. So let's see if we can get the other camera working. And it'll just take me a minute actually, so you guys can chat away in the chat stream. And I just hope that I don't lose you. Et voila. Yeah, you're right, Rebecca. The big guys, they're great for plying up stuff. Like that was actually why I ended up using them so much. Like when I was testing them, that's actually what I used them for, was for plying, because they were so great for plying. I'm just gonna get my screen set up here, and then I think we're good to go. Okay, so the first yarn, and I'm gonna switch over our screens here. Every time I switch you guys over, like every time I make a change, the live pop-up chat goes away, it disappears, and then I'm like, oh, to redo it. So that's why I keep pausing, because I'm looking for my live chat so I can see what you guys are saying, because I don't know what you're saying if I can't see it. So, okay. Yarn. The Fiber Club this month from Sweet Georgia was this absolutely beautiful, I don't have it with me. It was a 50-50 merino tencel. I was looking for the card, the insert, and I don't have it with me, so I'm not sure where it's gone. It's kind of disappeared, obviously. I spun it up into a cabled yarn because I was really curious as to what this yarn would look like when I really wanted to see what the yarn would look like when it was not just a traditional 2-ply or not just a traditional 3-ply. I was really curious about what it maybe would look like if it was a something a little bit different. So I ended up doing it into a cable. And actually, when it's in a braid like this, in a what do you guys call these? In a skein. It really doesn't do it justice, I don't think. I think it's a little bit... cabled yarns just don't look awesome when they're skeined. Like, even when you're in the store and you're looking at a commercial cabled yarn, like, they just don't look great. But then as soon as you take them out of the skein, they just look amazing. I think anyways. I just think these yarns are just gorgeous when they're not in the skein. They have a real bounce to them and a real pop. So I spun this on my Susie Pro, and I spun I split the braid in half, and then I spun each half to a bobbin. And then with those bobbins, I didn't. I spun them to the same bobbin, but I put a spacer in between. And I did a demo video a couple months ago on how to do that when I was winding bobbins. And I'll link that in the show notes at wellforpearls.com. How I take that out and how I use that as a marker for when I need to stop winding my singles. So I got to that, and then I spun. So after I'd spun, I put a spacer in between the two singles, and then I made 2 center pull balls and I plied them back on themselves. And the one center pull ball knotted so badly, I was actually worried I was going to lose just a massive amount of singles. Like, I thought I was going to lose the whole thing. It just kind of like, you know, when you've got a center pull ball and you're pulling from it and you don't really think about it, but it kind of caved in on itself and all of the singles pulled out all at once. I've never had that happen before. And it was almost like the ball just exploded, and I'm not sure why, because I had rested the singles for a little while. Like, they weren't super fresh, they weren't super springy, but they just went nuts, and it ruined the center pull ball. And then the other one was pretty smooth, but same thing. And I think it's just, for whatever reason, that it was the center pull balls both wound quite tightly, which I normally wouldn't do. And I think it just, this whole center just lifted up and out. So I did 2 center pull balls, spun those to 2 bobbins, and then I put the 2 bobbins on my Lazy Kate and I plied them together. So I spun my singles Z twist, I plied S twist, and then I cabled Z twist again. So if you want a lesson in how twist works, cabled yarns are a great way of learning how twist works, and because you have to keep balancing it. This was designed by Charlotte Lee, who works at the Sweet Georgia studio, and she just, these colors are so her, which is really, it was really fun to spin it. It's called Very Berry, I think, and yeah, I think it turned out really nicely. I really like what it looks like, so I wanted to show you guys. I didn't get very good yardage. I only got about I think I got like 168 yards, I think. That was it, 168 yards. Not very much. So for more details on this yarn, it's going to be the enhanced content for October. So if cables are something that you really want to learn how to spin and you want to learn how to balance them and you want to learn how to do all of that, that might be something for you to check out on the Patreon support pledge tiers, because cables are really complicated. They're something that a lot of beginners make by accident. And then once they become more experienced spinners, they tend to find it really difficult to spin them again. And I have a couple of theories about why that is. And I think one of the reasons is because when we're beginning spinners, we tend to over twist everything. We just put tons of twist in everything. So that is that spin. So Eve is wondering, oh, this is 50/50 merino tencel. So that's why it has that beautiful lust and sheen to it. The camera is actually having a lot of trouble with it because it is so lustrous and such a lot of sheen. This is actually way more accurate as to what it looks like. I'll just switch you over for a minute and then you can see. This is way closer to what it looks like. And it's got a lot of sheen. You can see from the light, it's just tons of sheen. So yeah, 50/50 merino tencel, very slippery to spin, and it needs a lot of twist. So Eve was wondering if you slightly over twist the singles, because you lose twist in the singles when you ply it, but don't you add it back in when you're cabling? Yes. So what I like with cabled yarns personally, and what my personal preference is merino tencel needs a lot of twist to really highlight the sheen. Otherwise the singles they don't look like they have enough twist in them. They almost get like a bit matte looking. So if you put enough twist into your singles, in a 100% wool yarn, they'd be overspun, but with the tencel content, it's actually not overspun, it's just balanced. So yes, they need a lot of twist, but not because you're over plying it, mostly overspinning it, mostly because the tencel needs a lot of twist. You just need to put more twist into these yarns. Tencel doesn't have a staple length, it doesn't have any scales. It needs a lot of twist. I have some Rami sitting here, and it's exactly the same. Like the amount of twist that you put in Rami is way more than what you would put in if it was just a wool yarn. So this is a 100% wool yarn, way less twist. Way less twist. This takes about triple the amount of twist. So same thing with the merino tencel. The other yarn that I finished, and let's see if I can get this working again, was the Pay It Forward yarn. So this is that yarn that I was working on. That's the Pay It Forward for the Louette S10 that was gifted to me at the University of Victoria back when I was at Anwig, and it turned out really well. And I did these areas in this yarn that are coiled, so you can see them here. I coiled parts of it, and I just really love this yarn. I'm actually really sad to give it away. Oh, Eve is wondering, how would it work when cabling a 100% wool yarn? Okay, so with the merino tencel, Rami, flax, cotton, anything that is not wool, basically, nylon, anything like Firestar. What else? Can you guys think of anything else? Basically all of the fibers out there that aren't wool, they just need more twist regardless of what you're doing with them, as a general rule. So you're not necessarily going to over twist your singles when you're making a cabled yarn, because you are going to be cabling it. So you're going to be putting it back in the direction that you spun your singles. You're going to over twist when you ply, and then when you cable, you just want it to balance. But with your singles, you don't have to over twist them more than you normally would. That's not something that you have to do. But if your fiber that you're starting with needs more twist, then you need to. Does that make sense? Hopefully that helps. I'll just wait a minute, Eve, and you can tell me if that makes sense. Because my throat's getting dry anyways, and I need coffee. So this yarn is an alpaca merino silk or nylon. I think it might be nylon. Oh, good, Eve. Okay, good. It is, I core spun this. I talked about this last show. So I core spun this, and then I auto wrapped it afterwards. So I did it as two separate steps. I would not do that again. It was really difficult to auto wrap it because I auto wrapped it in the same direction that I core spun it. So I had core spun the yarn with the wheel spinning S twist, so clockwise, and then I went back and auto wrapped it because my mom had given me a whole bunch of thread, all this old polyester thread from the 70s, and the colors were perfect with this yarn. So I did that, and I auto wrapped it. So I auto wrapped it going S twist, and then because I had so much twist and it was so overspun, I actually spiral plied it with the same yarn that I had used as the core, which is just some white, I don't even know what it is. Like it was just some generic yarn that I had in my stash. And I love how this yarn turned out. I think it turned out really, really pretty. And I did do some interesting stuff in parts. Like I did do these super coils in places. And I didn't worry about whether or not I anchored the coils because I figured if they moved a little bit, it wasn't a big deal. But I'm just really happy with how the yarn turned out. Like I just really like it. And it's very pastel-y, but it's pretty, and it's still got some interesting places because it's got some of these dark spots, and there's some dark blue spots, and I just really like it. So that turned out really, really well. And I'm actually going to send this across to UVic in Victoria. It's University of Victoria, which is in our capital, British Columbia in Victoria. My brother and sister-in-law actually live literally across the street. And my parents are actually seeing them this weekend. So I'm going to pass this on to them and get them to take it home. And Katie's going to walk it over for me, my sister-in-law. She's going to walk it over for me to the lady that gave me the wheel. So that's really fun. I'm looking forward to that. I'm going to switch back my cameras because, I have one more thing to show you. Just going to make sure that everything is okay. Okay, good. So the last thing I wanted to show you was Sweet Georgia Club called Fast Forward, and it was from back at Christmas time. This was January actually of 2017. And Katrina and I both spun this month, back in January. We both spun this one. It was a superwash merino nylon blend. You guys will probably recognize it when you see it because I talked about this on the show. And I only had spun half of it. And then Eve had actually asked in the Slack channel if I could do a really quick recap on how to spin, how to do chain plying, Navajo plying, and I had these singles spun for the last half of this spin, and so I decided to do that for the teaching content for October for you guys because Eve had asked, and she asked so nicely. So I have the one that I spun in January, and then I have the one that I just finished spinning. And the funny thing is the one that I did in January, it has a lot of red in it, and the one that I just finished has tons of blue. So I don't know how I divided it up. I have no idea. Because you can see how blue it is. And I chain plied this. The singles are quite fine. Eventually these will probably be socks, probably just ankle socks, I'm thinking. And I put a crap ton of twist into this yarn. And yet when I plied it, it doesn't actually look like it's very high twist. I think the twist angle is like, it's not that severe. Yeah, I think it's only like 50 degrees. It's not very much. So I'm thinking I might actually put this back through and just add some more twist to it, because there's parts of this yarn now that it's been, the one that I spun before that's been sitting since January waiting for its mate to be spun. There's parts of it that almost looks like it's underplied because it has been sitting. Does anybody ever find that when yarn sits for a while, it almost looks like it unplies itself? Is that just me? There's a phenomenon that I have been experiencing lately where that is the case. But you can see, like in here, Like, it's not that high twist. I would prefer that it was more like this. That's how I would prefer to have it. So that it's like way tighter. That's a pretty big difference. So I'm thinking that I might tighten it up and throw the whole thing back through the wheel and just put it on like 14:1 and just fire it in and just tighten it up. Oh, good. You guys experienced that too. Okay, I'm not the only one. Oh, I thought I was going crazy. I find that all the time. Like it's like they relax. So you wash them and you finish them and you skein them and then it's like they relax. I think that must be what it is. And wool seems to be worse than anything else. This has nylon in it and it's superwash merino nylon, but the merino has no scales on it and it's got nothing to hold it in place. And of course you can't full it. So it really makes me wonder if the fibers just relax. Because like Cascade 220 is like that, and like Cascade Eco and stuff, they hang on the wall for a long time, and Barocco Vintage has to be the worst. And then you go to knit with them and they like are untwisting. And if you just tighten them up a little bit on your wheel, they're way nicer to knit with because they're just a tighter ply twist. But it's so weird. I'm glad I'm not the only one. So that's that yarn. I don't really have a lot more to say about it because I just wanted to get it plied up basically. But you can see how much more red this one is compared to this one. This one's really blue. So I don't know what I did when I divided up the braid. I have no idea. The last thing that I wanted to talk about was spinning wise, because I need to be cognizant of the time, is some yarn that I've been deconstructing. So this is some Cascade Eco that I pulled apart, and I talked about this last time really briefly, and I talked about I think I talked about untwisting it and drafting it apart and stuff. I think I did. And so this down here is the singles with no twist added. So I untwisted it, I anchored it on one side, I untwisted it, and then I anchored it on the other side so that there's no twist in there. So if I pull on it too much, it actually literally just disintegrates. And I've been trying to recreate this yarn, and it kind of is working, it's kind of not working. I think unfortunately, I tried the Texel BFL cross. So I took some BFL and I took some of my Texel, and this is comb top and this is roving. And the Texel's pretty beaten up. Like you can't see it on here, but there's a ton of VM in there. And there's a lot of neps and a lot of just junk in there. And this is the waste that I'm getting from blending the two together on my hackle. So kind of frustrating because that's a lot of waste. And the resulting yarn is okay. It's really soft. But it was a pain to spin. I got the right gauge, like I got the right, sorry, not gauge. I got the right wraps per inch. So I was going for 7 wraps per inch. And it's definitely 7 wraps per inch in places. But it was really hard to keep it consistent. So there's parts that are like, 5 wraps per inch, and there's parts that are like 12 wraps per inch. So kind of frustrating. And I think it was hard to spin partially because of oh, this is just not working. And I think it was partially hard to spin because of the very, very, very different staple lengths. So Texel is like it's a down, it's very, very springy. It's spongy, it's got a spiral crimp. You can see the neps in there, just insane. And the BFL is long stapled, it's shiny. This is one that came from the out in the valley. It's very smooth, it's really long. It hasn't been, it wasn't processed in China, so it wasn't cut. And the yarn is just kind of, it's got a nice luster. But I don't love it. I don't love it. So I'm kind of back to the drawing board. I'm going to try some different yarns or try some other stuff. I did start a control card for this yarn, but you can see like how inconsistent this yarn is. Just on the ply back test alone, it's super, super inconsistent. So, and you can see Nora had lots of things to say about it. She wrote her notes up there too about the yarn. Oh, it's not Texel. Sorry, it's Polypay. I thought it was Texel, but it's Polypay. Very similar. So I'm actually thinking that I might just spin the Polypay long draw and just leave it on its own. And whatever happens, happens. And take the roving and break it in half like this. And then break it again. And spin it like that. So it's a little bit thinner. And spin it long draw and just see what happens. Because it's giving me a headache. So, yeah, it's just a pain. So I think I'm just going to spin it long draw on my own and not try to blend it with anything at this point and just spin it up. And whatever the yarn ends up being like. The reason why I was trying to create this blend was because I wanted to knit this. And I showed this last show. But this is Marmor by Regina Mossamore. I don't know if I'm saying that right. And that's what I want to knit. And it's this great like garter stitch cardigan. And Cascade 220 would be an awesome substitution, but I don't want to buy more Cascade 220. I want to spin it. So that's where I'm stuck. I'm not sure what to do. There's a question. So Eve is asking on behalf of Jessica if she does not have the focus to be able to simultaneously count drafts and treadles, any tips? So basically what I do is okay, this was part of the enhanced content back in August. And I don't have anything in here that I can show you, but I'll give you a really quick and dirty thing. So this is really quick and dirty. Just to get you going. So I take a length of yarn and I measure it. So let's just say that this is 15 inches, okay? Let's just say for argument's sake, and I'm going to turn this off so that we don't have the the camera shorting out and making everything really slow. Let's just say this is 15 inches. I measure this with a tape measure and I secure one end onto my wheel at the orifice, and then I hold it in my pinky finger. So let's just say this is anchored to my wheel. There we go. The monitor is my wheel, okay? I hold this in my pinky, and as I draft out, oh, it's not going to stay put. Do I have any tape? Oh, I do. I have tape. Okay, hang on. Bear with me, guys. And then we're going to say goodbye because it's getting too long. And I have to make sure the dogs are okay. And it's getting really hot in here. Okay. Don't you just love crafters and like makers? We always have like tons of stuff everywhere. Okay, so I take the yarn and I tape it to the orifice of my wheel. So if the orifice of your wheel is like right here, and if you have a Magicraft or a Ashford, you have to tape it to the back of the wheel and then account for that lost distance between that and the orifice of your wheel. So I tape that to the orifice of my wheel, and then I have the fiber, I've attached it to my leader, and now, and I know that this is 15 inches. Let's just say this whole thing is 15 inches. From the orifice of my wheel, as I draft out, I can count my drafts. Sorry, I can count my treadles. So, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Sorry, that's my draft. So let's say I'm treadling along. So I'm drafting and I'm treadling. and I get to the end here and I've treadled 4 times, and then I feed it into my wheel for a 5th time. That's 5 treadles. So if you're on a double treadle wheel, that's 5 revolutions of the drive wheel, because I only count 1 treadle on double treadle. So I go, down 1, down 2, down 3. Does that make sense? And then when I get out here and let's say I've treadled, this is 4. So then I go, treadle 5, and on that treadle 5, I put the singles in. I never had to count my drafts, other than the first time when I figured out other than figuring out the length that I'm drafting. So as long as you know, so then when you do your ply back test, this is like a really in-depth discussion, and that's why I did it as the enhanced content back in August, because it's a really, really big topic. What you can do is figure out what your twists per inch based on your ratio is, and then you can work backwards. Like if you want, 10 twists per inch and you have 15 inches to draft over, that 15 inches, if you draft 15 times on a 10-to-1 ratio, you're going to have 10 twists per inch. Does that make sense? So you can use these lengths of string to kind of work backwards, and then you don't have to count the number of drafts. You can count the number of treadles and figure out your length of draft based on a longer length. And actually the math is easier if you do it that way too. But that is why it was the enhanced content, because it's a massive discussion. So that'll get you started, and then just play with it from there. It is super hardcore, Kelly. That is how my yarns are so consistent though. And why my twist is really consistent from start to finish. Granted, you can't do that on a spindle. So it's out for a spindle. Eve asked how Charlotte is these days. Thank you for asking. Charlotte's actually doing really well. She's getting older, but she's actually doing well. And she lives most days, she looks pain-free. It's hard to, because you can't ask a dog. But she lives mostly pain-free, which is really great. And she moves really well. And she can go for a walk for about 20 minutes without her leg obviously bothering her. So that's been really great. And she's still got a ton of energy. So, yeah, so that's, thank you for asking, Eve. Stashdown. I'm going to talk about this before we say goodbye. Jessica, if you've got more questions, I'll chat with you in the Slack channel, because that's probably a great place to chat about this stuff too. Stashdown is something that's been going on in the Ravelry group. It's a knit along, spin along, craft along. It's basically just trying to get the finished projects done and off of our needles, wheels, looms, whatever. Our friend Rebecca, who is Rebby J on Ravelry, has kind of been heading this up. She's been really involved with this particular along, and I have started my Stashdown project because I've been trying to get rid of some of my old yarns, and this is some old Rowan. It was a British Breeds yarn that they did that's now discontinued. I'm totally being a bandwagon jumper on this one because I'm doing Stone Point by Courtney Kelly. And I'm actually going to do it just a little bit longer because it's a little bit too short for my torso. She says in the pattern that you can lengthen it and shorten it, whatever you want to do. And so I am going to lengthen it a little bit, and I'm definitely going to lengthen it at the back because the back is definitely not long enough for me. I'm probably going to put in one extra pattern repeat. The only problem is that I don't know if I have enough yarn. So I'm going to knit until I'm going to finish the front with what it calls for in the pattern, and then do the back with the extra repeat, and then go from there. So that is that, and I'm working away. And if you have projects that you want to work on and get finished, please don't hesitate to join us, because this is something that's going to be just ongoing in the Ravelry group. To motivate all of us to get our bobbins cleared, get our looms cleared, get our knitting needles cleared, get our crochet hooks cleared, sewing tables cleared, everything. So whatever you're working on that you want to get done, please head over and check that along out. I think that's it for today, because I'm actually starting to get like a really dry throat. And I think that's everything. Does anybody have any questions before I say goodbye, or anything they want to say? Kelly mentioned about custom woolen mills, that she found that she got some different breeds and got some different, got an order, and she found they were quite nappy. A lot of that is their equipment. So unfortunately, a lot of these fibers that they're processing at many of the mills, their equipment isn't built for it. It's not fine enough to cope with some of this stuff. So this polypay probably needed to go through a much finer carder. And unfortunately, it's just kind of the way it is. And there is still a lot of VM in there because it's hard to get it out when it's just not fine enough to deal with it. Birkeland Brothers here in Abbotsford upgraded a lot of their equipment. They did a Kickstarter, and they're getting really, really good results off their stuff. So if you're local, definitely check out them because they'll do some processing, and their stuff is coming off really beautifully. So something to think about, and questions to ask before you buy from a mill or before you send stuff to a mill. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate you guys spending time with me and taking some time out of your day. The show will be live streamed in October on the third Tuesday of the month, so I hope that you'll be able to join us. And I hope that you have a really wonderful rest of your day and week. And until next time, happy spinning, everyone. Bye.